Assalamu alaikum. When did we stop calling Nazis Nazis and begin calling them stuff like right wing or far right or even just conservative? This is something that really people don't seem to be talking about at the moment. It's like we've just accepted this creeping fascism taking over. I remember back when Question Time invited Nick Griffin on. At the time, neo Nazis were like fringe groups. There'd been a huge fight that led by mainly the Caribbean and the South Asian community in an alliance to chase these people out of our neighborhoods, chase these people out of society, and even force the system to some degree to put some sort of measures in to protect people. And these were people at a time when being called racist was like being called a pedophile. No one wanted, it was one of the worst things you could be called. Now they're in government. We have MPs in our government who are Nazis. We have MPs and even the main party, the Labour Party, which is supposed to be the liberal sort of centre left party, is adopting Nazi rhetoric. And we're not shocked because it's happened in a sort of gradual and normalised way. We're not shocked by this. We just, they're taking a bit of racism here. This is Nazi rhetoric. This is the BNP's rhetoric that has now crept into mainstream politics. And I remember going back, Question Time inviting Nick Griffin on, and there was this debate at the time. Should he be allowed on or should he not? People were saying, yeah, we should let him on because we want to expose the stupidity of what he's saying. Obviously, they underestimated the man. Let's be honest. He was a lot more intelligent than they thought. And I'll never forget the one line where Jack Straw, who the butcher of Iraq, he was foreign secretary at the time of the massacre in Iraq took place, and he was there berating Nick Griffin for his Islamophobia, and Nick Griffin replied, "I'm not the one with the blood of 500,000 Iraqis on my hand." I'll never forget that line because that showed. And the thing was, it wasn't about whether or not he makes sense. Most of these racists on the street, they don't care about logic or facts or these sort of things. They just hate, and they want to point their hate somewhere, and they wanted an excuse to be able to get into hate. Right now it's Muslims and immigrants, but it will be black people, it will be Jews, it will be anyone when the opportunity presents itself for them to do this. So by bringing on Nick Griffin there, you start allowing Nazism to become part of the mainstream rhetoric. And then by starting to call it new terms, like when UKIP came out and the media started promoting UKIP, people were saying, oh, they're attacking UKIP. They mentioned UKIP all the time. This was a party with no seats. They brought them onto the leaders' debate when they hadn't got seats. Before the Green Party, when the Green Party complained, then they had to bring on the Green Party and the SNP and these parties that had seats. But this was a nobody party, just some neo-Nazi party that should have been nowhere. But the mainstream starts calling them right wing or far right or just simply sometimes right wing, the right wing party. And that's now what we've got. We've got Reform with 5 seats, 5 neo-Nazis in our parliament, and we should not be afraid to call them neo-Nazis. That is what they are. And we need to start finding ways to fight this. We're not fighting this by going with stand up to racism and these groups and just chanting shame on you. It's a load of people, shame on you. These people don't care about this sort of thing. We need to fight them on every level, and we need to make fascists scared again. Just like we did in the 80s and the early 90s. We need to show that there's no debate around this. We're not here to debate whether or not we're human beings. That's an important way to look at it. We have already had these debates in the past, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 50s, whatnot. We debated whether or not we're human beings. So we should not be debating now whether or not we're human beings. We should be making sure that this is pushed under the ground, back into the pubs with just a few racists sitting around their tables moaning about immigrants, but not daring come out into the real world and say these sort of things. We need to make clear that the media should not be promoting these people, because we very likely could have a neo-Nazi prime minister next. Nigel Farage. And by the way that Tories in particular, but Labour as well, now have started to take neo-Nazi rhetoric in order to try and take votes, that's not going to stop him. If people who want neo-Nazis are going to vote for neo-Nazis, not neo-Nazi light. And so we just really now need to start understanding this, stop trying to make out that this is some acceptable politics that should be allowed into our society. You know, this is not about democracy and freedom of speech. Freedom of speech for who? You know, freedom of speech for who? You know, when they're looking up Palestine Action for throwing red paint on a warplane that's going to be sent to take part in a genocide, yet the neo-Nazis are running around throwing red paint on roundabouts and on anything they can. You know, freedom of speech for who? So forget all this. This stuff needs to be pushed underground. There's freedom of speech, and then there's freedom of hatred. And we need to understand the difference. And we need to understand that freedom of speech does not excuse Nazism, does not excuse racism, especially now that racism is being used as a tool, pushed on by the mainstream media to support genocide. Just like in the Nazi Holocaust, when anti-Semitism was pushed to support the genocide in Europe at the time against the Jews and the Roma and the other people who were victims of the Holocaust. The Islamophobia is now being pushed to support the Gaza genocide. And we need to fight this on every level for the sake of the future of not just ourselves, but of this country in particular. This country, racism will destroy it from the inside, just like it did to Germany, to Nazi Germany. It's something that Malcolm said clearly about racism in the United States and what will happen racism here. Let's not normalize racism or allow it to continue to be normalized. And that first and foremost starts by calling Farage what he is. He is a Nazi. We could use the term neo-Nazi, but it doesn't get any softer than that.